Tales from the Hand, a Vampire Memoir by Stephan Handbringer. Reading 4. A Meeting with Artemisia. Making my way through the sparse forest at night, I was always moving away from the road. I spoke to little birds to help guide my way, and to keep me from the troubles of the night. Slowly I made my way to thicker forest where humans dare tread. These little birds sparkled in the moonlight in my vampire, and their night song was sweet. It cut the night's darkness and illuminated my sweet heart, that shined light in my cold, undead chest. Then as night song birds and I traveled in the moonlight, I saw a delightful abandoned cottage. In this cottage I would make it my home for a few short weeks. I bid the birds adieu. The forests around the cottage were thick. They diminished and muffled the sound from the beasts and men that made these wilds their home, presenting me with a small peace in a body that was at war with itself, calling out to things my mind did not want in the night. The cottage had its failings. It was not perfect, in perfect condition, though it would suffice. Things were strewn about the cottage floor, and there was a hole in the roof. I found some branches and bush that I threw upon the roof. Then I jumped up upon the roof from where I stood. The branches in my arm were being used to patch the hole of the cottage. Seeing a branch that I could imagine a broom, I used it to sweep up the detritus strewn about the floor that I would set aside for a muffled burning pit. This may not be perfect, but it was good, and with it I stayed a while, in the humble comfort of these cottage surroundings. These birds that followed me, guiding me here, would visit me every few nights, and we would sit by the cottage and whistle to the dark. It was nice to go to the river, start a small fire, to heat some water, and draw a bath in a wooden tub inside the cottage. In these weeks I prayed, had meditations, and studied this vampiric nature which I denied so. For so much of this vampiric nature was still unknown to me in these days of reawakening. What I had, I have no more. What I have, I never had. In my explorations, I found that I could fold flesh and bone into any state that I could imagine. Flesh zipped and spun, joined to my will. Flesh would take on any form which I would craft, which I could will. If any form was to deny me of a shape or texture, I would wish to form my own skill, would be the only thing to hold me back in creation of sculptors of the flesh. The practice and training of being a healer and an artisan in my old life found its ways into this new life. I may be cursed, but I would use my curse to help and not harm myself or humans because of my affliction. It was useful in my old life that I spent so much time with the magicians and artisans in ancient Greece, practicing the skills of healing, magic, medicine, science, philosophy, and the skills of the quadrivium that would allow me to use these skills to excel in the fight for what was good. I discovered my eyes could see such small things as I could only explain as micro animals, or that I could see for great distances which I could only imagine in my old life. My strength was greater than that of an average man. I could tear through a tree with my fist. My speed inhuman. Then one night I was never expecting anyone. I was hoping that I could spend a few years away practicing and perfecting my arts, to hone myself to sword sharp and keen. Though it was not to be, for the world, as it often does, has other plans for us that are not our own. And while we will work and conceive that which we will, the world will still take us and shape us in ways, directions, though these outside experiences as much as we will shape ourselves with our inside experiments. The world itself would forge and keen me as the hammer of experience was laid upon me. At the door there was a rather jovial, complexioned individual whose spirit was overwhelming. His clothes looked as though they were put together from a mix of clothing from the Sultan's palace to downbeat haberdashery. I knew this fellow had soul. Then he introduced himself, and I knew I would have a friend for life. This is I, and who are thou? My name is Stephan Handbringer, and who are you? Rolandis, Garibaldo, Herman, Michael, Werner, Edwards, Nichols? Well, bother! You can simply call me Rolando, because I will go on this way for days and days. Ha 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 ha! While he was prattling on for what seemed like days, he also pulled a hair from a hat. A bit of smoke and fizz occurred as he performed his trick. Hey, Mr. Prixie Wizard, get back here. I still have more magic tricks to perform. Would you just leave me be? I have things to prepare for. But, mister, I still have magic tricks to show you. Are you ready? And I have one trick you just won't want to miss. This trick spectacular. This trick amazing. I can tell you don't like those nasty vampires. I feel it. With their fangs and their terrible complexions, I know. They often have such nasty breath. And they constantly want to drink your blood. How could you know? I have not told you anything. Stare closely at me. Stephan stared intently on this odd fellow. Then a slight supernatural event occurred. As if all of this was not odd enough, he saw something. It seemed as though he saw a soul. And in this soul he saw sparkles. Though he had never seen soul before, and he did not know why he should, but he couldn't now. Before you go off being awfully flustered, mister, maybe I could help you. I have not had company for quite some time, and this world is awfully lonely sometimes, no? It is, and this should not have to be. It would be nice to have some company in these long nights. So let it be. So it shall be. So it was a friendship that would pass many centuries to come. This would not be known to me at this time. Rolando and I cleared up the cottage, leaving it as I found it, so there would be little trace that anyone had ever been here. We started marching north through the forest. Rolando was singing quietly enough to himself, but he was very perceptive as to what was happening around us. For as odd as he might seem, though this oddness was not his complete character, for all the dimensions of his humor, he would be disturbingly serious and stone, cold when challenges would occur. For it was a total change of character. His appearance also shifted during these times, taking on more predatory characteristics. From the cabin we were leaving, it was 390 miles to Paris. This march would take us a month and a half on foot, as we needed to stop in 10-hour shifts on and off. During some of this time, Rolando would make preparations for our travels by scouting ahead and procuring goods and services, protecting my resting place in the day, though he had a way of keeping trouble at bay, simply through his glamour. It had a way of transfixing, mesmerizing, and confusing those around them. If Rolando desires, people simply would pay no attention to the places and things he was close to. So many people simply passed us unaware that we were anywhere near. We took our time exploring the divergent paths within the circuitous forest maze, while considering preparing for the struggles and challenges in the nights ahead. Some of our preparation was making time to stitch our clothing clean our clothing, and sharpen our steel. All of the time was well spent on the road with a good companion, who would make the arduous, trying trails more fun with his insight and his antics. In the night I would hunt and skulk out large mammals to make my prey. I would share the corpse with Rolando. He would make this and things he foraged in the day his meals. There never was a problem hunting. If the food was at a distance, I could know through my extraordinary senses. In the distance, I could see them. Their blood caressed me like the sun used to. When the prey was captured, I could feel every contour, every sinew. I wanted not for the blood, but I was driven by it. In my prayers, I had respite, and it would subside this bloodlust. None of this beautiful life ever had a chance. So when I supped, I cried every time my heart broken. I pushed on. Then the joyful nights we spent together on the road would pass in a glint. The moment when we would meet would be met with guards of the city keep at the gate. These guards smelled of death and looked the same. Rolando shared a gift with me he had, and while we were at the gates we could communicate with pictures in our minds, so that when we spoke it would be plainly and adeptly. For Rolando, a barbaric wunderkind, could keep down hostilities with his manners and non-threatening words. We planned and we moved. Then we were asked by the guards where we intended to go and what are the activities we were going to be engaged in. Worry not, sir. We are simply here on business. Here is our paperwork. He pulled some documents from his fantastical jacket. The strapping, grizzled guard seized the document and looked over them carefully, though he was incapable of reading. The guard feigned an understanding, since he saw seals and signatures he had seen before that would lead him to believe the paperwork was legitimate. The guard was pallid and lily white, of a deathly humor. He could see that we were not as we seemed, though our paperwork checked out to him. He said that we need to meet with the prince, and this time Rolando thought that we should comply. Rolando shared an image of destroying the prince with me, alit with fantasy and magic and a hangman's noose. I interpreted this image as it would be easier to destroy the prince if we had access to the prince. In my mind, I shared an image with him of us peacefully going where we were told. The prince is in the Hotel Descends. The guard gesturing us in. Good night to you, fine sir. We would go to a place of agreed safety between vampires. This place was the Hotel Descends. And although I found no joy in having to deal with these foul creatures, I would hold my anger and aggression in check, that I might work for a greater good of the people, though the verisimilitude of my peaceful feigning. I rap upon the door, and am met with a gentleman of good taste. This gentleman greeted us and took our jackets. We complied. Might you come in? Please go down the corridor, and the last door on your left is where you are to meet your majesty. We walked down the hallway that was wallpapered with leather and gold plating and fine filigree and pattern, the floors of polished redwood. We made our way to a place in the hotel where there was a coterie of fiends, these fiends all playing the part of humans dressed in their beautiful and regal attire. Within the room there was a strange preternatural beauty who could not be ignored, moving out and around the pillars, listening and lying in wait. The prince was there to greet me. He did so with a bow. His coterie and vassals did what they should not. They broke the codes by which they lived and coerced me to give a drop of my blood through their infernal magics. This act a crime in which they would all pay for in coming years. They found me rather uncanny. I did not fit their preconceived notions of what they purported a vampire to be. And although I was not trusted, I was asked to stay in the city for a time, which I obliged and calculated, and used to my advantage as they used it to their own. They were planning on doing research on my blood because their old pepper and salt hair and beard-colored man that took my blood was an old sorcerer who would scry the blood to see something of my life. I knew of these magics from my old life, and I still had traces of the gift. Through this knowledge, I was able to know what this group of vampires would do and what they would ascertain from this blood. The old blood magician was infuriated by the actions against my kind I have taken. He saw the twist within my blood, and those who I have set free to be one with the divine. This unholy nightmare sorcerer began to be overtaken by the beast. He gained his composure because of Rolando's cajoling. You would not want to go against the prince's wishes, Mr. Wizard, he said with a glint and a gleam in his eyes. So planned to stay I would, and I would work at gaining revenge against the old wizard's assembly, for it was the sorcerer who scribed the blood, and not the prince that was behind these plans to destroy us. I welcome you, old one, to our city. Would you stay a while? The city will gain much renown by your staying. I will stay for as long as I am welcome. Do not concern yourself with the worries of my city. You come as a guest, and I will keep you as long as you will stay. Thank you. Thank thou, noblest regard, and the time which I will stay will only be time enough to entertain the tasks that must be accomplished herein. With that, I bid you adieu. Good day to you, then, and Godspeed. As I started to make my way to the exit of the Hotel des Sens, I was met by the one who danced among the pillars displaying grace, and playing through the attentions of the other guests, her actions and movements graceful and regal, with an ability to carouse and find her way accepted in the highest societies, even if her character was not as theirs was. The strange, alluring beauty Artemisia, whose impression was most seductive, though I was uncertain of what good could come out of engaging with another vampire without the purpose of slaying them. I was soon to find out that she would help me to cut a red swath across time, laying down the evils of many fiends. What brings you, gentle folk, to the contested kingdom of Henry IV? Research and tasks, madame. Short but intriguing. Now that you have captured my attentions, allow me to make you my guest. Come with me to a masterpiece in architectural sculpture constructed over the course of centuries within the Elise Campi, whose testament in time will tell what might be and what will be. For this palace of bone has existed before I have, and will long outstrip even my immortal life. So long has it been since these words of comfort would have brought to me their complete beauty and peace. I don't know if I should. Stephan, come on, don't be a bore. It ought to be fun. Well then, madame, it seems as though I have found my way to peace with our decision. We ought to be off then. May we regard this time as a rest and peace between the tides of violence and blood. We shall, and you will find peace here, if but for a little while. To the night streets we took, in the night we had tale. So we took to the windy streets, to the target which we seek. So in jest and joviality we did romp while we moved through the streets, down alleyways and front streets, changing and moving in labyrinthian manner. What puzzle could create with our footfalls before we came to the Elise Campi, the entryway to the Elise Campi for which we came, for which we found, the entryway of the Elise Campi, which was set with skulls and bones, mortar and stone. They shimmered gems in moonlight's reflection. We started making our way through the twists and turns of the Necropolis, where time faded and cracked bone makes up the very firmament in its construction. Artemisia noticed that someone was following us down these halls of the dead. She guides us through the mystery of her home, trying to tangle and trap the one following us. We stopped for a moment to regain our composure. We mustn't shake our tail, because our tale had come in a flash, and glory striking out and cutting me deeply, looking startled but reactive, not just a man but a beast among them. I prepared myself in less than a moment for the onslaught. I was going to unleash the predator. The hunter was not prepared to be the hunter's hunted. So my calm state changed, and I became red rage. I became death. My wound healed around his blade. I healed faster than he could harm. He had never encountered one as old as I. For all the assassin would chop, I would take, and the blows would not be enough, as I grew 3 claws from the end of my fingers, and my eyes went red, and all you could see was crimson, and all you could hear was screaming. What dead must rest in the necropolis must have risen, because I tore and rended ceaselessly at the flesh of this man. Gore and organs spilled across my companions. They too were terrified. I did not stop. I could not stop until the beast was all but a husk. Swiftly I then bit through his chest plate and straight through his heart, as I secured on what was left of the vampire's unlife. His spirit seen by my companions, and though they knew that this was possible, they had never seen such a ghastly act. The spirit hung green, putrescent, floating before consumption, screaming out for their help. His body now hung limp, dead, though the consumption of this corpus delicti in flagranti delectico, it was known to me who this assassin was, what their agency and what some of their plan would be. It was a plan through the king, who had been passed telepathic information about me through his old sorcerer, on what the court saw as a grave offense to my succoring upon the essence of other vampires. It had been a plan that the prince had thought was his own. But the old sorcerer wanted me for his experimentation. He wanted me to disappear from these long nights, though I understood his will and his want, for I wanted the same of them all, of those who chose this unlife. Though my companions bloody and terrified from what raw, pure violence they had seen, they were more committed to seeing a curse lay upon the sorcerer's house, and we would be its reaper. The death of this young one set a death warrant upon those who had conceded to the tasteless acts of bad manners. Artemisia certainly disdained bad manners. These undead sorcerers would pay with their immortality. They had been cursed by the divine, and divine wrath was coming. The curse was sent to the gates and then to the parlor. and soon to their homes to collect them, to reap them, to thresh them, to end them.